wherever I draw, I remember so much more clearly. The lectures that I draw during, I remember those lectures better than if I didn't. When I'm traveling, if I draw something versus taking a photograph, I remember it that much more internally because I've spent that much more time looking at it. So I remember I could go back to this coast in England and go right to that hill and not find these fossils again because I took them. But there were fossils this big strewn along the coast. But I remember right where it was. I remember the weather. It was raining. Of course, it was England. I was covered with mud and loving every minute of it. And so drawing them, I get to experience that again. You will have to go upstairs to see better images, clearer images. This is considered scientific illustration as well. These are arrowheads. There are techniques in every field. So, botanical illustration, there are particular techniques. Archaeological, the convention is that you have the front, the side, and the back, going from left to right. Also, you have the pen, you have your lines, curved lines, showing the way that the flint was chipped. So, these curved lines here, I didn't just do them because I liked the way they looked. That's the convention for showing how the tool was made. We have to have insects. This was done in Photoshop by Erica Bead. Insects are good because for the most part you only have to do half. And then you flip it because they're symmetrical. Here's another insect in Photoshop. It's beautiful, isn't it? And you can get much more vibrant colors. In reproduction, watercolor, pen and ink was traditionally used for scientific illustration. It reproduces inexpensively and easily. Watercolor is a lot more difficult to reproduce because of the translucency, because of the light passing in through the paper. More opaque mediums like acrylic reproduce better. Anything you do digitally, you know it's going to reproduce differently. Now, sometimes it works very well. If you're having an exhibit like upstairs, there would be some beautifully slick drawings, but you don't see the artist's hand, and I like seeing the artist's hand. The medical drawing of the shoulder perhaps could be considered theoretical as well. This is a product catalog. It's showing cells and chemistry. This is not something that you're going to see, that you have to devise a way to explain a theory or a process. I mean, maybe some of you have seen this walking around campus, but most chemical interactions, molecular biology, electron microscopy you can see, but you say primarily molecular biology and chemistry, you have to come up with ways to show them. Environmental. This is a habitat drawing. This is a northern diamondback terrapin. I forgot to put my name on it. It's upstairs. I did this for somebody who's spent their whole lives studying the northern diamondback terrapin, who has a very limited range along the east coast of the United States. And this was a commission by the organization she worked for. So in order to do the research, I had to spend a lot of time at the beach, so I could get the grasses right. You're not going to do an environmental drawing with the wrong vegetation. In real life, you would not see the juvenile with the adult. As soon as the egg is hatched, it's on its own. It moves out. So in scientific illustration, it's acceptable to put things together that may not be together. I talked about making sure your habitat is correct. Remember that there will be text along with all of these images. So having a juvenile in the same drawing as an adult, there would also be text explaining that in real life they wouldn't be, but the alternative is two separate drawings. This is done in acrylic. Again, here's your life cycle. You have to have a life cycle. It's a very simple drawing. It's a traditional drawing. It's from a children's book from the 60s. All the information holds true. We've all studied the egg masses to the tadpoles to the frogs, and it's very important. It does not have to be a skilled and beautiful drawing to be accurate. It has to be accurate first. Here's another life cycle. Do you have Japanese beetles here? Yeah. They eat all our roses. Another habitat drawing. This one's theoretical. This was for a children's book as well. So not only do you understand the insects, you have to have an imagination. You have to understand some atmospheric perspective to show that these trees are going off in the distance. We don't want to live in that world. So we have to take care of our environment now. Chemical. This is a product catalog showing magnetic beads. If you're trying to isolate cells from other kinds of cells, this may be a technique that you use. How do you demonstrate it? So this is the artist's rendition of how to separate cells using magnetic beads that are labeled. Then there are editorial. This is also still scientific. Now this may deviate a little bit from the straight science, but she's doing an illustration for a pharmaceutical company. Actually, this wasn't for a pharmaceutical company, but what causes migraines, migraine headaches, and how to put this all together to relay an idea. All the stresses. Chocolate, coffee. Oh look, there are chopsticks. Wine. This is for a pediatric journal cover. The article was about brain function and learning. I did not do this drawing, and I'm glad because the muscles in the arm disturbed me. They are not accurate. The body, the anatomy of the body disturbs me. But it's a good illustration of an editorial. So we've gone through botanical, medical, biological, theoretical, editorial, chemical. So as many other branches of science as you can think of need illustrations. So, who uses scientific illustrations? You can shout out. Scientists. Yes. Pharmaceutical companies, yes, and they pay the best. I love scientists, but botanists just don't have the same funds that the pharmaceutical companies have. Textbook publishers, science journals, and there's been some discussion here about being able to illustrate your own journal articles. There are a lot more illustrations in all of our journal articles in the United States. You're expected to have illustrations. I think that's not true everywhere, but illustrations are a big part of our journals. All the biology books that we start out with in school, our botany books, our anatomy books, our biology books from first grade on, museums, the dioramas that you see in natural history museums, the placards, the signs in museums, zoos. I did some drawings for a wetlands walk at a zoo that went along the walk showing what you might see. But zoos use a lot of illustrations, nature centers, drug industry, of course, medical schools and journals, commercial products. You may not think of commercial products as using scientific illustrations, but especially botanical illustrations. You look at all your cosmetics, and there are beautiful drawings of mint and different herbs and teas, especially here. I want to draw some tea while I'm here. And if you also want to make a good living, medical malpractice, especially in the United States. A lot of medical malpractice. And so the illustrations that you would use may be flash simulations of an accident. If you're in a car accident, what happened, and you have whiplash, what happens? And the illustrator will do drawings of exactly what would simulate what would happen in that instance. And so illustrations are used then. So I'm going to save some questions for the end, and I'm going to go through a short process of how I work, and then show you some pretty pictures of where we live, and then I'll open the floor to any questions you may have. Because we have plenty of time, I believe. Right? Okay. So how I create an illustration. I'm using the swamp azalea as an example since I did it specifically for your azalea festival here. The first step is to go out and find one. So I was forced to spend many days hiking in places where I thought I might find a swamp azalea. So I had done research to see where they'd be growing. I'm fairly new to upstate New York, and I don't know where everything is. So this is a habitat where I may find one. We live in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, about 4.5 hours north of New York City. This is where I found it. I found it at this garden, the Angels of Abundance, and they had a swamp azalea that I could purchase and take home. And here it is. Most azaleas bloom in the spring in the United States as well as here, but this swamp azalea Rhododendron viscosum, blooms in late summer. So I was very lucky. Now when you get a plant like this, when you get a specimen like this, it's pretty confusing. What are you going to draw? There are all these leaves, there are all these branches. If I drew that, not only would it take me a long time, but it wouldn't show anything specific. And this is what you might see when you open up a body for surgery, that there's a lot of information there. And as an illustrator, you have to dissect it and choose what you're going to show. The first thing I did was tag it. So I knew that was the branch I was going to concentrate on. I liked this branch because it had the bud on it and the leaf in different. I'll do this so I can turn. So I tagged it. I also put a piece of black paper around it. See, there's my finger, my thumb, holding this black paper. So I don't have the window, all the extraneous details behind it. So I could isolate it. Here's the flower. And you might be able to see some of these hairs, reds, they're very sticky. That's why it's called viscosum. It's viscous. And there it is in my studio. I've put the white flowers, I put black behind them, a piece of black paper, so that I could see it. If I just had it there without anything over it, I would get lost. And so you see here one of my initial sketches, a little bit of color here. Here's the plant. I've taken the flowers off. This lamp here is lighting my drawing, but there's another lamp over here. And the conventions in scientific illustration is to have your lighting coming from your upper left. If you notice and look at most scientific illustrations, the light is coming from the upper left, and that way you're able to see the details. You're able to sweep from light to dark. Now if you're left-handed, you may want to put the light on the other side, because having it from the upper left, if you're right-handed, then your light is able to flow freely onto your drawing and your hand is not shadowing it. So there are some of my tools and some initial drawings. And after I've done, there were maybe 8 or 10 of these before I got to this stage of putting this together. Now, the plant didn't look just like this. I took the flowers from one portion, I took some of the leaves from another portion. You have to make sure that they all go together, that they fit together. And then I did color studies. How to create white on a white background. What color of the leaves. And so I did a lot of different combinations of mixing greens. I generally don't take green out of the tube. I use blue and yellow to mix. And quick art lesson, if you have a warm and cool of each primary, you're able to mix most colors. So if you have a warm blue and a cool blue, that would be, say, cerulean blue and ultramarine blue. A warm and cool of red and of yellow. Then you can mix most of your colors. I don't ever use black. I mix black with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And so here's my grayscale. Going from light to dark. You want in a drawing to have a range of values. Otherwise it will look flat. So I did all of this work and decided I didn't like it. That it was going to be too hard to show these white flowers on a white background with watercolor. And so I started over again on drafting film with colored pencil. It seems like a lot of work, but when you're going to put 30, 40, 50, 60 hours into a drawing, it's worth spending that extra time to know what you're going to do, so you don't get halfway through and decide you don't like it. So this is hard to see. I have all the colored pencils numbered and exactly what colors I used in which order so that I could reproduce the color. It's very scientific. It's where art and science are the same. And this is not unusual to do. This is, I'm not odd for doing this. So when I decided the best way to do it, then I starred that combination, and those were the pencils I took out. I put everything else away. I did this on drafting film, which enabled me to use both sides of the film, and then to put a background behind it. And so there's the drawing. My environment is probably my greatest inspiration. So I pulled out a few slides of photographs I've taken in our area. So you can see that there's a lot of nature and there's plenty to draw. In the springtime, there are yellow irises around our pond. This is in our yard. And some hills, and in the pond there are fish and frogs and turtles and dragonflies and mosquitoes. This is not in our yard. This is in Maine, where I grew up. My living in New York now is the first time in my life I've lived off the coast. So this is Maine, the coast. Yes, yes. My grandmother refused to eat lobsters because it was poor people's food. Because when she grew up, only poor people ate lobster. Pardon? Yes. Yes, yes. This is a beach in Rhode Island where we lived for 25 years. When I say we, I'm referring to my husband, who's sitting in the front row, who comes over here 3 times a year for his work. This is Maine again. This is New York, where we live. And all these pictures I've showed you have been spring and summer. Again, this is New York. There's a river that runs through our town, a lot of hills. There's a lot of nature. You have to look pretty hard to not find it. You have to look pretty hard to find a store or a restaurant. This is in our yard in the fall when the grackles come. And in the fall, around the corner from our house, this is a horse farm with the trees beginning to change color. The fall is beautiful in the Northeast. I have one drawing upstairs of milkweed. And this is milkweed as it's starting to, the pods are starting to form. This is close to our house too. And later on in the season, as they're opening up, so this would be around October and November, you would see these. And they fly all over the place. This is autumn in New England. This is rose hips, the hips of the rose, so rose hip tea. This is it growing, Rosa rugosa. And then comes winter, all too soon. This is in our yard. The deer are there all year round, but especially in winter they come closer and closer, sometimes right up to the back door, looking in the window, looking for food, eating my shrubs. I've protected all my azaleas because they love azaleas. And we have seen deer in our yard, we've seen bobcat, we've seen black bear, we've seen red fox, we've seen, we don't have a large yard, but there is a lot of woods behind us and fields. Hawks, we have eagles, rabbits, moles, voles, snakes, porcupines, woodchucks. See a lot of wildlife. Winter. Winter with a few birds. Winter in our yard. There's the pond. Whoops. Here's the pond that we looked at earlier, frozen. And there I am on the beach. The end. So I want to invite you to ask questions or make comments, and there are some microphones down here, so I wonder if somebody has a question, either they can come down or somebody can run over with a microphone to ask. And you can ask anything about technique, about inspiration, about anything that you want to know about.
So if you can use English, that's fine. If you cannot, we can translate for you.
Good, because my Mandarin's a little rusty.
For some environment like here in Taiwan, what did you suggest to notice for like a startup? Some basic elements to begin such business for scientific illustration.
So as I understand it, the question is if you wanted to start drawing here in Taipei, scientific illustration, where would you start? How would you begin? I would begin by carrying a sketchbook with me wherever I went. It could be this big, and a pencil, and just start documenting, just start noticing what you see, and just start drawing. Really, whatever you draw is going to help improve your skills, whether it's a coffee cup in a restaurant or a teacup, I'm sorry. Whether it's a cup or a plant, start noticing when you're outside what the air is doing, what the sky is doing, what you're smelling, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, and start taking notes. Have you been able to go upstairs to the exhibit? If you're able to go upstairs to the exhibit, in the entryway when you first go in, there are two notebooks that have pages from my sketchbooks, from my nature sketchbooks, and you can look through those for inspiration to see that I do a lot of writing and a lot of scribbling. Just start observing. I told somebody earlier, they asked about what's a good reference, how to start learning how to draw. And if you want instruction, there's a good book in English that should be easy to find, but if you can find it, or if your library has it, it's called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. Bettydwards, drawing on the right side of the brain. And that's an excellent book for learning drawing skills.
I think the most difficult for me is the proportion. Either like Azaria, the proportion, along the length and the width of the leaves, and then it's a proportion to the flowers. How to have good control of the proportions.
Let me grab this pen over here. Oh, I guess I don't have to stay behind the cage if I have this with me. The greatest tool probably is a pencil or a pen. And if you hold your hand out straight and squint and hold it straight, you can't hold it like this or like this. Pretend that there's a sheet of glass so that you'll hold it out straight, and if you have your arm out straight, you'll know that it's not going to change length. It's not going to be, your arm will stay the same, pretty much the same length from day to day. And for proportion, what I do is I take my pen, I'm going to use you as an example, I'm going to measure your head. I'm looking at this woman in the red and closing one eye and seeing, oh, her head goes to about here with my arm out straight. And if I compare that with the rest of her body, there are about 5 heads in her body, which is which is normal.
6 is better.
Well, I can't really see the bottom of her boots, so maybe she does have 6. But, so that's one way to get the proportions correct. So when you're measuring like a leaf against a flower to get the proportions correctly, you can also walk right up to it and measure it. And as far as proportion, say in architecture, if I was to draw this room, again, I would close one eye, hold my pencil out, and anything vertical is going to be vertical. Otherwise, the building is going to fall down. But this upper wall here, and the stairs going up there, we know that they're not going straight back. And so again, I would keep my pen straight, and I would tilt it to that angle so that it's matching that angle. So the upper wall is doing this, and the lower floor is doing this. And then it's going to converge, and you'll have your perspective. So there are a lot of tricks like that. I don't know if it's a trick, but there are a lot of techniques like that that help you learn.
Lots of patience.
Patience and repetition. People who want to draw, I've often suggested to my students that they draw 5 minutes a day. Because if you draw every day, you're going to improve better than if you draw once a week. You have Sunday afternoon free, you have 3 hours on Sunday afternoon, and oh my God, I've got this big piece of paper, I have three hours, and I have to make a beautiful painting, and it's terrifying. If you draw 5 minutes a day, everybody has 5 minutes a day, and maybe that 5 minutes turns into 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. Maybe you can't keep it up every day, but it's that repetition that improves your skills. And even if you're not drawing, what you'll find, what happens is, if you don't have a pencil and pen with you, as you're looking around, you will just start drawing in your head. You'll start thinking, oh, that goes up at that angle. Oh, that proportion is like that. Or when you're starting to study colors, you look around and you're like, oh, his shirt is the same value as his pants. It's a different color, but they're the same value. Or how would I create that texture? That's what I'm doing in the grocery store when I'm in line. Or if I'm waiting, or at the airport, I look around and I just start thinking, how would I do that texture? I don't know, but I think about it. Or why doesn't that outfit go together? They're different colors, but they're different values. That's why it doesn't work. Right? Like, I'm not really happy with this blouse, with this jacket, but... And it's all about value as well as color. And in a drawing, value is more important than color. I just want to say that. I'll say that tomorrow morning in the basic drawing class. We'll be talking about value, light to dark. Ah, he has a Red Sox shirt on. You have extra points for a Boston shirt.
Thank you. I enjoyed the talk very much. I learned quite a lot. But here, I also would like to share some of my experience about how to get a good proportion. My experience is I think for me that's pretty useful. Usually I will make a frame, small frame.
Yes.
So I got a cross in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 4 little squares.
Mm-hmm.
So actually I can just use that one. And I know the final size of the paper or something. And also I can put this frame in front of the object.
Yes.
Yeah. So then I think that would be quite helpful because in that frame already have vertical and also have horizontal lines. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's some of my experience.
Yes.
Thank you. And here I would like to have another question. For me, I think I didn't really have such kind of scientific illustration because I didn't have a scientific study first. I just draw it directly. So I think for me it's pretty good. You show how to make this kind of test first. And we can make sure next step how to apply the color and get the color better. Yeah, but I don't know for what kind of situation you would think, oh well, I should apply this scientific test first, or I just want to draw it directly. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure I understand exactly the question. I understood all what you were saying about the proportion and the box. But so if you want to create a scientific illustration, you have an art background first. But you're a botanist as well, right? Oh. Oh. Oh.
What kind of situation you would do that first?
Oh, what kind of illustration did I do first?
When you are doing the color testing before you draw the pictures, when did you do that?
Oh, the color studies?
Yes. Are you doing that every time or just sometimes?
Oh, when I'm doing an oil painting, I do it right on the board. I don't do the... Well, I mix the colors on my palette first to get the colors I want. But with oil, you can keep going over it and over and over it. So if you don't get it the way you want it, and it doesn't have to be the color, it doesn't have to be a particular color, there's a lot more flexibility. If I'm just doing a regular... I tend to mix my colors first. I do tend to do color studies. I do. But that's personal and maybe because I'm so used to doing that. Now, a lot of people, I mix my color on the palette ahead of time. A lot of artists will mix on the paper. So instead of mixing your blue and yellow to make green on the palette and get just the color of green, there are also a lot of artists who will, and scientific illustrators, who will do their mixing in layers of watercolor on the paper. So they'll lay down a shade of blue, and then they'll lay down a shade of yellow, and that gives you a lot of translucency to the painting. I find it mentally more difficult to do, but you can mix on the paper, and if it's not for scientific illustration, it doesn't. You choose whatever color you want it to be. So, okay. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I would like to say that to ask a question about the scientific illustration. What's the most fun part to you? Because to me, that's a scientific illustration, like so strict, restricted, and so specific one. It's kind of boring, you know. So I would like to know what's your driving force in this kind of job.
The first part I get excited about is the research. I enjoy doing the research. I like doing the preliminary drawings and figuring out how the leaf stem fits together. I like seeing what's inside the seeds, and I like doing the reading of the research, like my drawing upstairs of the lark sparrow. I like doing the research of finding out that, oh, this is one of the very few birds where in courtship the male will walk rather than hop, and that he'll pass a twig to the female in the courtship dance. And so I enjoy the research part, and I enjoy the preliminary sketches because there's not much pressure there. I don't like the composition. When I'm working out the composition, that's where I get up a lot, visit the refrigerator, go out for a walk, decide that, you know, I probably should cook dinner or clean, or, you know, that part of it is more challenging for me. And there are always stages for different people. And then, again, transferring the drawing when I have it all set is exciting to me. The first layers of paint, I enjoy. Finishing is a challenge. Knowing when to finish. There's always a stage in every painting, in every drawing, where it looks terrible. Whether it's oil painting, any kind of artwork, there's a stage that looks like you've never drawn in your life. And it's discouraging. So sometimes, you know, again, that's where you take a lot of breaks, or you learn techniques for looking at it in different ways. And if something's not working, then I'll put it away and I won't look at it for days. And then I'll take it out, I'll put it up in the studio, I'll walk away from it, and then the next day I'll walk by and I'll, you know, take a look, just glance in, and I'll say, oh, you know, that's what's wrong with it. Or turn it upside down and see how the composition is and how the weight is. If you find that it's very boring, then that's not the thing to do. I happen to like stippling. I find it meditative. But I also like doing large charcoal drawings. I've just started oil painting and I love it because it's so forgiving and the colors are so bright. So I don't stick with one, I don't just do one thing. Then I would be bored. If that's the only kind of artwork I did, unless I was being paid very well. Well, even then, I would probably be bored if that's all I was doing. Yes.
Gretchen, when you point out chemical turned out to be one of the categories for scientific illustration, I was quite surprised. Although Dr. Xie also mentioned that because it's very difficult to be realistic, to me impossible to be accurate. Only in science fiction we could see some like a chemical world. To me, science is of a thinking style, and chemistry. I'm a chemist. Chemistry is very difficult to be transferred to common knowledge to general people. One of the major reasons the microscopic world is difficult to be realistic and impossible to be accurate. So how do you, since I think you agree with at least the modern scientific illustration, probably chemical is one part of it. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So can you make some comment on that part? When you cannot visualize this world, how do you do it?
Well, first of all, there are specialties in scientific illustration. And there are people who, that's their specialty. I did some work for the radiology department at the hospital. I've done some things like that, but people often specialize either in botanical or zoological. I like to be a little broader, but chemical, molecular biology, people do specialize, and there are some symbols that are recognized as symbols for certain, like a symbol of an antibody, a symbol of an antigen, a symbol of a red blood cell. So there are conventions there. But you see in the magazines all the time, descriptions of how a virus works, or it's the artist's interpretation, and sometimes they're effective and sometimes they're not. And I think what happens is that that's one field where the interpretation keeps changing. So if you looked at illustrations of how the HIV virus works 10 years ago, then the way artists are describing it now would be different. I think my suggestion to you as a chemist is, because you understand your field, is when you see things that work or see things that are inaccurate, contact the artist, because they're struggling with it too. They would like the feedback. But yeah, that is a challenge.
Well, I guess actually the question may come from, how do you know what the atoms look like? How do you know the carbons look like this and then the nitrogen look like that? Those are not accurate at all. Those are just imaginary structures.
Yeah,
so
imaginary.
It's hard.
Yeah, so that's where the creativity comes in, but it has to, there's some conventions that have stuck, but then, yeah.
So kind of sign. It's not illustration, it's kind of sign. It's different, it's kind of language. Kind of sign, right? Symbol is kind of sign. Not illustrate. Just describe it. Actually, that's a different story.
Okay. My question is, now you say the interpretation, right, is kind of keep changing, right? This stage where people seems using 3D and animation. Do you think this kind of new, direction of doing illustration have any kind of drawbacks, or just go full swing for it?
So the question is, this kind of illustration.
Yeah, or just traditional is better.
Oh, is traditional better?
Or just go for those 3D.
Yeah. I wouldn't say traditional is better, no. I would say traditional techniques are important, and the basic skills of drawing are the same no matter which technique you use. It would be almost impossible to make a living today as a scientific illustrator unless you're well established if you don't know digital techniques. Everything that I send out digitally. Even if I create the work with traditional materials, I scan them and send them out digitally. So you have to know how to do that. The traditional techniques, I think there's going to be a resurgence back to that look, but the last 10 years and now it's such a new field that slick is slicker. But one is not better than the other, no. It's the accuracy that's most important. And of course with digital techniques, you can show things in 3 dimensions. You can show things as movies. You can show a plant growing instead of doing 30 drawings of different stages. So there are a lot of advantages to both.
Okay, next question from the gentleman in the back.
In addition to the chemicals, can you tell us more about the techniques of painting things that you cannot see or observe? For example, galaxies or geometry of space-time. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, if you spend 50 or 60 hours painting a flower, are they going to change during this time? How do you preserve the original image of them? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll start with the second part of the question first because it'll be easier. Yes, the flower changes over time. I take photographs, and most flowers you can have more than one. So as one is starting to wilt, you pick another. It's going to have the same number of petals, the same number of stamens. The leaves are going to be similar. So you can use 5 or 6 different plants to create one drawing. So as it goes. Also, if you put it in the refrigerator at night in water, then it stays fresher. No, seriously. It's a bigger problem with something like an invertebrate or an insect that's dead. You lose the color and you don't ever get that color back. So that's more of a challenge. Illustrating galaxies and space, there are people who specialize in that, and I have 2 good friends who that's exactly what they do. And you can look up some of their work. Lynette Cook is known for doing a lot of galaxies and space, and she's been in Science magazine and a lot of different magazines. And she has a very realistic technique. When I first knew her, she was using airbrush a lot to get that smooth kind of look. She still uses traditional techniques, but she uses digital as well. And another friend, Britt Griswold, works for Goddard Space Center at NASA, and he does a lot of drawings too that are theoretical. And you learn about the subject. I mean, they would be able to answer this much better than I. You learn about the subject, and you come up with sketches, and you're working with a scientist. You're working together with a scientist. The scientist often doesn't know what they want until they see what you've done, and then they know that's what they don't want. But it's a start. No, it doesn't look like that. It looks more like this. And so you have those conversations and start coming up with something that's going to show what it is. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's like doing a drawing for a children's book or for a fantasy or a fairy tale. You come up with ideas and throw half of them away and work with the ones that come closest to what you're trying to depict.
Okay, the students. Go ahead. Go ahead.
我可以讲中文吗？
Please.
就是我想问，当一个科学插画家，他的生活就是在经济跟时间分配，还有忙不忙这方面的问题。
Okay, your turn.
Well,
A question.
can I answer in Italian?
That would be perfect. Well, her question was, as a scientific illustrator, how do you balance your economic needs and time used and your life and things like that?
I married Ron.
So she married a guy who can make a lot of money.
No, actually, that's a good question. I taught for many years, and I worked as a scientist in a hospital for 25 years. I was doing research. So I had a full-time job in science. I had a regular paycheck. I had health benefits. I was drawing, illustrating in the evenings and on weekends, and I was also teaching. So I had other means of income. Now, there are plenty of people who make their living 100% from their art, and I'm sort of in that transition area now because we moved away from where I was working for my husband's job, and so I no longer had that income, but I have his. But this is important to have a source of income, and so now I'm freer to spend more time doing illustration and teaching without without worrying so much about paying the rent, where instead of having to do multiple jobs. But I did for 25 years or 30 years. I had other jobs. There are some staff positions still available in museums and in universities, though they're the first things to go in budget cuts. The people who have staff positions have full-time jobs. We've mentioned the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators a couple times, and that's the organization I was president of. It's an organization of scientific illustrators based out of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. And they still have staff positions where you can be an illustrator full-time. But it is far and few between, and so you have to have some other source. You either have to be willing to live like a starving artist until you get established. You also have to use all the means that you have to advertise, and right now it's social media. I don't know if that answered your question. It's hard. It is hard, and some countries are better than others. Illustrators are more respected in the European countries, and it's easier to make a living as an artist in Europe than it is in the United States. I don't know how it is here, but yeah, it's something to consider, what you want your lifestyle to be and what you want to do. But the way that I did it was having a full-time job.
需要我翻译吗？应该不要了哈。那个前面那位同学。
Good evening. I've heard from a friend that almost all the textbooks of biology, botany, or other use scientific illustration to depict any species. But I think if we only see on the appearance, and scientific illustration will not as good as a real photograph. I mean that if a student graduates from university and he works in a forest, he not know what plant it is when after he learned it, because he didn't see the real thing. So what is the reason you think that we prefer to use scientific illustration than a real photograph?
A photograph shows you all the information. A scientific illustration will show you, has the ability to edit that information. So if you're trying to identify a plant and you're looking at just a photograph, you may not see the fine details of it. An illustration will point out and show you, oh, the edges of this leaf are serrated. There are hairs on the underside of the leaf. Watch out for those. You may not see those in a photograph, but an illustrator can take the diagnostic features of the plant and make those more visible. If I was going into the woods trying to identify something, I take field guides that have illustrations and field guides that have photographs. And even then, you may not know it when you see it, because in the illustration and the photograph, you're picturing it to be this big or this big, and you walk right over it because it's this big. Even though you've read the text, you're looking at it. So if you're trying to learn a particular plant, say, I would use photographs and illustrations together, and then spend a lot of time looking. Then you'll see other things as well. Yep. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay, the gentleman in front. Go ahead.
Hi, I would like to know how to manage the difference between real object and the illustration. For example, the imagination or the arrows in the illustration. How to decide what should be in the illustration or what should not be in the illustration.
Okay, so if you're doing an illustration, for example, of a plant, you want to know what should be in it and what should not be in it. The first thing to do would be to know what's ordinary for that plant. Say you're drawing a clover and you pick up one with 4 leaves. It's good luck, but most clovers have 3 leaves. We look and look and look in our field of clovers to find a 4-leaf clover because it's good luck. But so first you have to know what's common for that plant. Even in the habitat, say you have a plant that's normally grows in a field, but it's in the woods, then it's going to be a lot more elongated than it is when it's growing in the field because it's reaching for the sun. So you have to do your research and know what's ordinary. And then, depending on if somebody has hired you to do this drawing, then they'll tell you what they want you to show. Do they want you to show the fruits? Do they want you to show the flowers? Do they want you to show the way that it grows or the effects of the environment? So you have to know what the purpose of the drawing is. If you're doing it for yourself, then it's up to you what you want to show.
Okay.
First, thanks for the sharing and those wonderful paintings. That's impressive. And here is my question. Are there already many professional illustrators nowadays, or just is it a new area that needs more people to put themselves into this business? Thank you.
It's actually an old field. It varies from country to country. Probably in Europe it's a very old field. There aren't a lot of scientific illustrators. I would say that most scientific illustrators know each other or know of each other. And one reason is because it's not a hugely lucrative field. Medical is more than biological or botanical. But most of us know each other or are aware of each other or know each other's work. But it's an old field. It's as old as long as there have been scientists. Probably, well, the caves in France, right? What year, the Chavou caves in France? Does anybody know what year those drawings were? When?
10,000 BC.
Yeah, 10,000 BC. Okay, so that's an old field. And those animal drawings, those are probably the first scientific drawings. I mean, they're accurate. They're not anatomical. But so the science and art and drawing and illustration has probably been around as long as there have been people.
As you mentioned, you use multiple tools and material to do illustration. How could you decide which tool or material to do illustration every time? Depends on the purpose of something else.
How do I decide what material or tool to use for an illustration? As you could see from the swamp azalea, I thought I would do it in watercolor, and I decided that the white flowers weren't going to show up well in watercolor on white background, so I put a colored background and did it in colored pencil. A lot of illustrators stick to one media. They perfect one type of drawing in one type of media. I favor pen and ink and watercolor because I enjoy those. I enjoy using those. I choose my media according to the subject. When I did that turtle up here, watercolor wasn't going to cut it. Colored pencil was going to take too long. I used acrylic, and I could get the effects that I wanted in acrylic. I'm not a big fan of colored pencil. Some people love colored pencil. They think it's very quick. I think it takes me longer to do it, and I don't care for the feel of it as much, but I use it when I think that it's going to be the appropriate thing to use. So it's personal preference. It really is personal preference and what's going to show, how it's going to be reproduced. Watercolor does not reproduce well, so if I'm doing a drawing for a magazine, I would probably ask them first how they were going to reproduce it. Did they have the funds to do four-color illustration? Do they have the skills to be able to reproduce a watercolor drawing? Watercolor also, it's harder to get those brilliant colors. So if you want something that's very soft, maybe you would use watercolor. If you want something with a lot of impact, then you would use a more opaque medium.
Okay, the students.
Sorry, I think it's how to explain my question, so that I let somebody help me. 在就是科学插画当中，就是风格是可以存在的嘛？还有就是像是一些画家，通常他们的签名会被签在就是画作上面，但是科学插画家就是 通常他们不会。那他对这件事有感到就是沮丧，或者是有什么想法？
Okay. Does the scientific illustrator develop their own style of work? And then the second part of the question would be, most of the painting, the painter was artist would put their name, sign their name on the artwork, but then scientific illustrators seldomly put their names on their work. So would you feel bad about that?
First question, yes, people develop their own styles. Second question, most scientific illustrators do put their names on their artwork. They do. Some publications remove it, and then you call your lawyer.
And make some more money?
And there is an organization in the United States called the Volunteer Lawyers for the Arts. So artists have lawyers who volunteer their time specifically for artists for things like copyright infringement, and but we do put our names on our work. Sometimes it's initials, but usually we put the copyright symbol and our name on the work.
Okay, thank you.
我想请问一下，就是在美国啊，那个科学绘图方面的人才，他在教育养成过程跟他证照取得方面的讯息，就是整个教育养成的过程，它是有没有一套系统，然后他的证照是如何取得？谢谢。
Okay, the question is very perfect for you because she is asking how do we cultivate a scientific illustrator, and is there a certificate that you can get to show that you are a certified scientific illustrator?
You cultivate scientific illustration by having exhibits such as this and forums like this. There are certificate programs in the United States. There are maybe 6 different schools that offer certificate programs in scientific illustration. Some are specifically botanical, some are medical. There are 4 schools that offer certificates in medical illustration, I think 6 or 8 in scientific. So yes, there are. In other countries, I know that there are scientific illustrators. I don't know what schools or what certificate programs they have. But in the United States, it's very easy to get a certificate in botanical illustration now. This has been just in the past 10 years or so that this has sprung up all over, but there are maybe 4 major schools, the Rhode Island School of Design and University of California at Santa Cruz, that are the most known for their certificates in scientific illustration, and then Johns Hopkins University and Michigan, I'm not sure if it's Michigan State or University of Michigan, have medical programs, and botanical all over the place. The New York Botanic Gardens has a certificate program. Wellesley College has a botanical certificate program. So there are. If you go onto the website for the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, it's www.gnsi.org. There's a link for education. We have a conference every year that people from all over come to, and it's a full week of workshops and lectures and networking. There's a similar conference with the association, the American Society for Botanical Artists, ASBA, and there's another one for the medical illustrators called the AMI, Association of Medical Illustrators. So those 3 organizations have annual conferences. And So if you were interested in the field and you could get some funding, that would be where you could meet a lot of people and take workshops and get introduced to the field. I think there's going to be a certificate program here at NTU in the future.
Hopefully. This student here.
Thank you for your impressive speech today. And since you are a scientific illustrator, that you always have to draw things with accurate. But I was wondering that if there are times that you want to draw a painting with your pure fantasy, or do you prefer drawing with your own creation? Thank you.
I have many, many sketchbooks that are drawings that aren't scientific illustrations. Cartoons, thoughts. When I'm sitting in a restaurant waiting for somebody, I have a lot of drawings of my food or my plate or waiting. I have a lot of cartoons of my husband while he's watching football. I also, back in New York, Tuesday nights, I join a group that we do oil painting. And in the summer, we go out every week. I go with this group and we do plein air painting. We do landscape painting outside. Again, that's fairly realistic. I make costumes, and I make handmade books, and I knit, and so I do have other creative outlets. I make masks, so those aren't realistic. So yes, I love art materials, and I love playing with them, so yes.
Okay, question from the
Well, this is not really a question. I'm not good at any artwork, and I'm a serious reader. My concern is, as scientific illustrators altogether as a community, are you not worried, but at least concerned about whether this old profession and field will be eventually replaced or fading away? Then we have all the 3Ds and all the satellite pictures and all the other more recent technologies.
I don't think...
And then the overall the publishing of books or scientific magazines as an industry may be not as profit-making or, yeah. Could you comment on this? Thank you.
Sure. A lot of illustrators whose jobs were illustrating for textbooks, what they're doing now is they're illustrating for textbooks online. They're using digital techniques, but they still have the same drawing skills. I don't think there will ever not be a market for illustration. One field that's excellent for scientific illustrators who want to have more flexibility and more creativity is children's books. There's still a lot of room in children's books. It's hard to get into the field. And you can use traditional techniques and you can use digital techniques. Most children's book publishers don't care which you use. So it's not like a lot of science fields where they want it to be digital because they're going to be changing it. When I'm talking about children's books, I'm talking about children's nature books, children's science books. And so that's still a big field. I don't think most artists are worried about the field going away. The staff positions have been eliminated. A lot of staff positions have been eliminated, so it's mostly freelance work. But there's still a lot of room, and a lot of people like using all the digital techniques. But there's still, the publishing is still needs illustrations. Yeah, so it's not as big a threat as as you may think, because of all the online books that you can do artwork for now. In fact, even more so. There's probably more publishing now.
Okay, now final questions from us.
I just wondering, I thought all the drawing is amazing, but I'm studying architecture. Usually we will put the scale rulers on the drawing. So I'm just wondering why the scientific illustration won't put the scale ruler on it, or just because you're not really make sure every the right size of that, or just another reason?
Some do. Some do. If you're looking at a biology book, you often will have those ruler marks to say this is 4 centimeters, this is 10 centimeters, especially if you're not drawing it to scale. So it is used, not as much as in architecture, but probably more in archaeology, archaeological illustration, and in botanical. Less in biological, less in medical, but botanical, archaeological, entomology, insects, you will see those ruler marks. You won't see them, the drawings that are upstairs are the original drawings for the most part. Those ruler marks will be put in publication. They'll be put in as an overlay, so you won't see them on the original drawing.
Okay, it's been very nice speech-wise, and also the discussion. And we thank everybody to be here, and we also want to thank our speaker. Let's put our hands together for questions. And as appreciation, and we would love to give you some gifts. And this is a mixture of gifts. I will later on show you guys what we give to Gretchen. Thank you. We had a very nice gift because she is an artist. We have a very nice gift from Gugong, our National Palace Museum, to make a really nice drawing for you. And because you live a big house with the wood and with all the wolf and coyotes and bear, so we had a very a pistol. No, it's not allowed a pistol here. Gun is not allowed here. But we do have a very nice flashlight. Very nice flashlight. This is for you. Thank you. And then the next one is from my personal collection. This is Scientific American from Taiwan. But then in the first page. Gretchen Harper. So this is for you to read. It's all in Chinese. Ron can help. Okay. And the last but not the least, we have one of the very nice picture of you. This is the slide that the poster we made. Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thank everybody for coming. And our staff has something to talk to everybody for, so please stay for a couple more minutes. Thank you.
不好意思，谢谢各位今天的参与啊。那我跟各位提醒一下，就是现场报名的同学，那我们如果说有需要2个小时的 TA 研修时数的同学呢，那要麻烦你们到台前来，那我们会给你们我们的认真贴纸，然后再去外面合章。那另外呢，线上报名的同学也都已经拿到合章贴纸的同学呢，请从前门后门出去，我们都可以找到我们工作人员合章。那如果说要能够满足我们的那个研修时数的资格的话，就要麻烦您就是确实的把那个手上的 passport 拿到盖章的记录才行哦。那就是谢谢今天各位的参与，谢谢。那需要拿到合章贴纸的同学，请到台前来，谢谢。